Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello, and welcome to episode 91. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm joined today by Kelly Mackin, the co-founder of Motives Met, a work well-being assessment tool that was created to bring more mindfulness into how we work, to challenge workplace norms, and to empower people to incorporate well-being into their work life. Kelly is a quantitative researcher, a coach, and a meditation teacher, blending ancient wisdom with science to access deeper understanding and make positive change in the workplace. And here's what we cover: work-life balance and the cause of out-of-balance conditions, the Motives Met framework and its application, how to align our inner motives with our outer world, and how to utilize our Motives Met themes as the future of work shifts. We end this episode with our Dose of Inspiration segment, where Kelly shares some of the things that are lighting her up these days. And as always, I'll put links to those items, Kelly's contact information, and a special promo code for 25% off of the Motives Met assessment for listeners of this podcast in the show notes. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Kelly, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I've been so looking forward to chatting today.
Great. So please share a bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Kelly Mackin. I'm co-founder of my company, Motives Met. But just to give a bit of background on me and my work life, I'm a quantitative researcher of human behavior. So I'm one of those people that loves knowing why, we do what we do, why we don't do things we want to do, how we can be happier and healthier. So, that researcher curiosity led me to want even deeper understanding into human behavior and understand the psychological side of things. So I became a cognitive behavioral therapy practitioner, certified in mind management coaching. I really love understanding our crazy human brains and the science of how we think. And all of that brain training and kind of cognitive work then led me to meditation. And believe it or not, I was a pretty big skeptic when I stumbled upon meditation, but it had such a profound effect on me that I became a meditation teacher because I wanted to be able to share it in a very kind of modern, real world way to help improve our life in and outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
So I took all of those tools in my toolbox and started a coaching practice, really focused on stress and anxiety. And wouldn't you know it, with most of my clients, a big source of stress was often things related to their work life. So I took this background and I started Motives Met. Motives Met really is a work well-being company. And at a high level, it's a framework and it's a mindset we cultivate around what well-being at work really is and how we can thrive and be happier and healthier in our jobs. And from all this research we gathered around work well-being and this brand we started, we wanted to actually create a tool that was very action-oriented to help people have more work well-being. So we created a data-driven assessment where people would uncover what are their most important needs, what we call motives, that they need met to be the most happy and fulfilled in their work life, so that we could really help leaders, companies, and individuals to achieve that well-being that everybody's looking for.
Oh, that is quite a journey. What I love about that story is that you followed your curiosity. So there was this innate need to understand and to really get into the science part of it. But then suddenly you find yourself in meditation, and then how all of this comes together to create a solution for people to try to have a better understanding of what it is that gives them that sense of balance and well-being. That's quite a story. Before we get into the tool, let's pull the lens back a little bit and talk about work-life balance from your perspective. How would you define it?
Sure. It's interesting. Work-life balance is actually one of our 28 motives. And when it comes to any motive, meeting motives is very individualistic. So everybody does have a different lens that they view their motives from. But I think overall, to me, work-life balance and what some of the research showed is that it's wanting your work life and personal life to reinforce one another, to support one another, and not be at odds with one another. And really having the time and energy and attention to give to things outside of work that are important to you. So it isn't necessarily about finding this perfect balance, right? Or this certain equilibrium, but it's about feeling like you can live your holistic life and that work either doesn't get in the way of that or ideally can actually help support that.
I love that. It's not the superwoman cape, let's do it all perfectly. This is more, how can I do what I need to do and still have the energy and attention? I love that phrase, the energy and attention to do the things that actually light you up. And it feels like it then fuels on itself. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And something that's really interesting too is that when it comes to work-life balance, some people need more integration and some people more separation. So, some people really want there to be a seamless synergy between work and life, and it's just kind of flows and it integrates in a way that really creates harmony for them. Whereas others really want, hey, I need a start time to my day at work. I need a stop time. I need to not check my emails. I kind of need to create more separation to get this work-life balance. So it is interesting to reflect on, again, if work-life balance is a motive for you or just something you find important, in what ways does that manifest specifically for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never really thought about it that way. There's really two sides to that coin. And I can see in different parts of your career, depending on what your job is, both of those can come into play in a different way.
Yeah.
Integration and separation. That's
Mm-hmm.
really wise. Well, I want to get into the tools. Let's talk about Motives Met. Let's talk about this framework. How did you develop it? And then how do you use it?
Well, it really started with my mom and I, who is one of the other co-founders of Motives Met, just talking about the work world that we dreamed of, the one that we wanted to be possible, the one that we believed could be possible. Just a little side note, but I remember as a kid so long ago, I came down for breakfast one morning and my mom was making pancakes and my jaw dropped because my mom was like VP to come, she was always gone for work. She didn't have time to make pancakes. She never made pancakes. And I was perplexed. And she was like, well, I haven't gone to bed yet. I had worked through the night. And honestly, from that moment on, it became the norm for her to pull all-nighters for her job, to work weekends, to be chained to her computer. And I just kind of thought, I guess that's like what you need to do to be successful and have a work world that, you feel you're reaching all your goals. And then I actually went right in her footsteps and reached total burnout and ended up in the same position, pulling all-nighters for work, getting physically sick from work. And I think probably like a lot of your listeners, at one point in my work life, work has been a source of pride and happiness. And at some points, the biggest source of ill-being in my life. So kind of seeing both sides of the coin for both of us, we know we can do better and we want there to be a better work world. But we didn't want to just keep talking about this world we dreamed of where stress was manageable and the relationship between the company and individual was a win-win. We were like, we really want to do something. So we went all in on the research to really figure out what is well-being at work. And luckily, it's a hot topic of conversation right now. Mental health, having emotional health at work, reducing stress and burnout, creating employee first cultures. It's great we're talking about it. But again, we went, how do we achieve this stuff? How do we measure it? So we started our quantitative analysis journey to answer all these burning questions. Put the Motives Met way, we wanted to know what makes a work life well lived. And a lot of people claim to have the answer. I mean, there are tons of podcasts, thought leaders, TED Talks, books that kind of claim, hey, you need this ingredient, or you have to have community, or you have to have purpose to be happy at work. Actually, just the other week, I was listening to a podcast and he was saying to him, purpose, growth, and gratitude were the three most important things to really have happiness and well-being at work. So we studied all these different facets of work life. And what we found is there really isn't a one size fits all approach. There isn't a magic formula. There isn't a perfect recipe. That really well-being at work is when people's motives are met. So motives are our most important needs. There are psychological, emotional, and social needs in our work life. So we identified 28 of these different motives that fall into 10 overarching domains. So for example, there's the autonomy motive, flexibility, and free expression. Those are 3 of the 28 motives. And those are all part of the freedom domain. The community motive is part of the personal connection domain. Passion and purpose are in the meaning domain. So we identified this whole framework, and it's really easy to grasp this on our website. There's this motive circumplex visual that's cool and it's animated, and you can kind of see how this all comes together. But what gets tricky is everybody's motives are different. What our research showed is that when your most important motives are met, when those are healthy, when those are strong, that's when you're most likely to be living your best work life, to be most fulfilled, to be most loyal to your company, to be able to keep your employees around. But what's most important to you, right, Kathy, is different than what's most important to me. We have different motives. So it gets really tricky. Well-being is not easy. You know, those articles that it's like, oh, the 10 ways to have well-being at work or the 5 ways to make your employees happy in the job. It isn't that simple.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to create Motives Met to make this a little bit easier. So when you take our assessment survey, which is about 20 minutes, you get your top 5 motives that you need met right now in this season of your work life, because motives change and evolve as your work life and your personal life changes and evolves. So you get your top 5 motives, and then you get all these great insights around your motives about, I think it's like 60 plus pages. You know, you get work wellness check-in, you get tips, a way to craft your motive story. You get all this great information to actually help you take action to better meet your motives.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of the high level background of the tool.
Yeah, and I can attest. I actually did take the assessment, and I love what you say that it's not this one size fits all. At different points in my career, if I would have taken this assessment, different things would have been important to me. And so right now, it didn't surprise me that achievement and growth were in there. Innovation wasn't too much of a surprise. It was the purpose and the flexibility. As you say, that is something that is aligned to this season of my life. And I love those words. This is what's important to me now, where when I was in my 20s, not as important. You're trying to learn, you're trying to grow, you're trying to achieve. And so I can see how this can grow with somebody and shift as they grow and shift inside. My question is, how do we implement this in the workplace where everybody has different motives? How do we get teams aligned?
Well, I think given everybody has different motives, right? That's why it is so important to start using it in the workplace. Because a big obstacle to meeting motives in the first place is that they're often not talked about. We don't really go up to one another and say, hey, what do you need to be happy at work? What do I need? Managers and leaders really aren't the best at initiating these conversations. So just when we use the tool, know our motives and then share our motives, and not just our motives, but the story behind them. Why? Right? Like, Kathy, why are those your top 5 right now? Right? Which motive are you most grateful for? Which motive am I as a teammate maybe best at helping you meet? What's one thing we could do at work to better help you and support you in meeting this motive? It's partially getting these conversations to happen. So, when we work with companies, we just did a workshop last week. We have everybody take the assessment, and then people share their motive stories. You can do different workshops that talk about what builds these motives up, what blocks them. How do they align with our values as a company, and where are we doing well and where are we not doing so well? So getting them out in the open is really the first step towards meeting them.
It also feels that this would lend itself to diversity of thought when you're building a team. Is that fair, or am I overreaching here?
No, I definitely think it can. I think that can definitely be a strength of the tool. Absolutely. And I mean, respecting and accepting motive diversity to begin with is a huge part of the tool, because we need different perspectives, and we need people who have different needs and who can help others well meet motives that maybe they don't even have. So getting each other in a room, if you're on a team, right? Or if you're a manager of a team, and making sure everybody understands, and we co-create work wellness, right? We're empowered using this assessment to better meet our motives, but we need to all support each other too. So it's super beneficial just to have everybody aware. Awareness is that first step, right? That first catalyst to change when it comes to anything.
Mm-hmm. Does this have any applicability in people's personal lives? Like, does this help with families and partnerships or community?
Yeah, I think understanding ourselves and each other, the people in our lives, is at the heart of everything important, right? So anything we know about each other that matters, I think is absolutely part of building better relationships. And to give you an example, one of my friends was laughing because I have the flexibility motive. That's one of mine. But she laughed and was like, "Oh, but you're so rigid." Sometimes. But when I shared with her part of my motive story and how it's kind of my rigidity, right? Like I have the flexibility to design my day and do things in a way that works for me, but then I'm very rigid with what I set out to do for myself. And so, she laughed and said, "God, I can see how that's so true in your personal life too. And it's just so interesting." And she knows me very well, but this is a new piece of information that she went, "Wow, it makes a lot of sense."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I love it. I love it. If this doesn't work out corporate wise, you can always do marriage counseling.
There we go.
There'll be broader applicability here, right? But sticking with the workplace, has been a lot of stress and burnout, especially this past year and a half. What is the cause of that? Is it this misalignment? And can this tool help to alleviate that?
Well, I believe that motives are at the heart of well-being from all of our research. When your motives are strong, it has shown that people are happier, they are less stressed, they feel less burnt out at work. And, a definition of stress that I love comes from my meditation teacher, David G., which is that stress is how we respond when our needs are not met. So motives are our deepest, most important needs. If those needs aren't met, that creates stress. If I have a need to feel I can believe and trust in my leaders, and that isn't met as the trustworthy leadership motive, that's going to create stress. If I have the fairness motive and I'm not being treated fairly at work, it's going to create a lot of stress. And what Motives Met helps us do is not put a Band-Aid on things, but actually start to deal with the root problems. Because it's great that companies are starting to, have meditation classes and take a free yoga class and take a self-care day. Those are all great, but if people's motives aren't met, they just don't matter. I had a friend who works at a great corporate company in Silicon Valley area, but she said, they're offering these free yoga classes at 5 and I'm at work till 9. I can't even go take advantage, and she's like, this only helps me so much. So instead of just stress management, which can be very surface level, Motives Met helps us actually get to stressor management and looking at if we have an unmet motive, that's a big stressor for us, right? And dealing with that and getting to the root problem there is really going to actually make a long-lasting impact on stress in our work lives. The way I think of it is my motives are flexibility, autonomy, future success, achievement, and security. And if those things aren't well, I am not well in my work life. If I don't feel like I'm reaching my goals, if I don't feel like I have autonomy over my work life and self-determination, that is going to stress me out.
And I think it's in that disconnect, that feeling that's uncomfortable because your needs aren't being met. Those are the things that we numb. And we can numb it by work, or we can numb it by unhealthy habits, or whatever that might be. So is that where the well-being piece comes in, that we make better choices when we're more aligned?
Yes. And when we're more aware of when we're not aligned, right? Because like you said, we're busy. Half the time we're just trying to get through the day. So it can shine a spotlight on what needs our most attention. And sometimes what needs our most attention is the motive that isn't met. And that's one of the reasons sometimes it can rise to the top. It isn't maybe that you find something else unimportant, but it's kind of like this motive's really vying for my attention right now because it's threatened, because it's barely surviving and not doing well. And we call it actually having a carefrontation with yourself to kind of sit with an unmet motive can be uncomfortable, but that's what empowers us to change it, to really face it head on and go, okay, what am I going to do about this? Because it's easy to just be busy or bury our head in the sand, but that is very disempowering, right? So we can go from a much more passive place to a much more active place in meeting our motives once we're aware of them.
Mm-hmm. With your experience with meditation and mindfulness, how might that be used as a tool to be able to ease some of that discomfort and then actually be able to take some action?
Well, mindset is such a big part of meeting motives, actually. It can be very behavioral and very cognitive. So, just showing up more intentionally with your motives, right? Being mindful of what they are and what other people's are. We have what we call these work-life well-lived principles that helps you develop a motive mindset. And one of them is to live your work life on purpose with purpose. And when you're using meditation and mindfulness techniques, it helps you do that a lot more. And then you add on knowing your motives on top of it. And then that adds just another layer of power to go, how am I intentionally creating a mindset around this motive that's going to help me? And in some of the work wellness check-in questions, we have some really interesting reflective questions there, kind of make you go, am I doing that? Should I be doing that? What do I think about that? So you start to pay attention in this different way because being truly consciously aware of your motives is different than kind of vaguely knowing in the back of my mind, oh, I guess I kind of care about that, or I know that's important. So having that mindful training on top of knowing what your motives are just gives you a lot more power over you being happy in your work life and you being healthy in your work life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then there's this idea of being a good fit where you are. So let's say somebody does have that awareness. They've taken the assessments. They're mindful of what's important to them. And now they're looking for a new job. How do they assess the corporate culture to see, is this going to be a good fit for me?
When you know your motives, it's amazing because there's so much information on social media, on the internet, on their website. But then on top of it, when you know your motives, you can ask really great questions in the interview to go, how well met do I think this motive is going to be at this company? Right? I can ask, hey, what's your favorite part of community here at this company? Right? If community is one of my motives, that's a great question to ask or to understand. If I have fun as a motive, to say, hey, what's the most fun thing about your job? And how do the people you interview with answer that question? I have a friend who almost took a job, was very close to taking a job and didn't. And he said it would have been great to have the knowledge of motives beforehand because he is the growth motive and the future success motive. And both of those motives are in the advancement domain. So he interviewed for this great job that was on paper everything he was looking for in his next job. But he didn't see the long-term potential there. He didn't see a big room for growth in the way he wanted. But he still was having that internal battle because he was like, God, but this job, it's like everything I want on paper, right? It checks all the boxes. But knowing that these were two of his motives, he said, this would have just made me feel so much more confident in my decision that these are two really important needs that just weren't going to be met. So even though this job checked a lot of boxes, it did not complement these two motives for me. So, knowledge is power, and going into an interview knowing that you're going to ask questions around these things and asking the right questions is just really beneficial.
Yeah, that's a great approach. What about the flip side of that? How would you counsel somebody who knows that their motives aren't being met where they are, but they don't want to change jobs? How might they be able to action some positive change for themselves and their company?
Well, I think it's very, again, specific based on what your motives are. So, what's a really good exercise once you've gone through your motive results is we have all these prompts to help you kind of develop and think about what we call your motive story. And part of that is taking a step back and looking at your motives holistically. It may be saying, hey, this motive isn't as strong right now. Like, let's say maybe my work-life balance and balanced pace motive aren't as strong as where I want them to be. But God, I feel like I'm growing so much and I'm advancing so much and I'm achieving so much. So maybe I'm okay at compromising this a bit. But what low is too low, right? And it's starting to have those conversations with yourself. Or we have questions in there like, what's in your control to change versus what's not in your control to change, right? It's a great first step to say, okay, maybe I don't love certain parts of this culture. If I have the shared culture motive, can I create a subculture? Who else here has maybe the same values I do? Can I do that? So it's kind of looking motive by motive, as well as taking a step back and looking at all of them and going through those work wellness questions and go, if I have work-life balance as a motive, what can I do to protect my time? Do I protect my time? It's a great question to ask. Another question we ask in there is, do I set boundaries with my time? And if I do, who doesn't follow them? Who does? Is there anything I could do to change that? So it's really taking the time to sit there and go through your motives and be strategic and, again, active with them instead of passive. And that can really help fuel yourself to go, I'm doing everything I can to meet my motives, even if I can't control the outside world.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're really bargaining from a position of power. And sometimes, especially when you're working with corporate culture, it can feel like there's nothing I can do. But I love that idea of subculture. So yeah, we're operating under this big umbrella, but certainly there are pockets and there's a sphere of influence that I do have. How might I be able to use that?
Yes. And acceptance. I mean, part of it sometimes is maybe just accepting, hey, I don't want to leave this job because for this reason or that reason, or these motives are really strong. So maybe I can become mindful of this and actually just sit in that acceptance. And that creates a much more positive emotional experience than always going to a negative place of, oh, I don't have this thing I want. Right. So doing that mindset work with your motives can be a huge thing that you can personally do always, no matter who on the outside is affecting them that you don't necessarily have control over.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredibly helpful. Over the last 18 months, there have been huge shifts on how people think and about their work and what that means to them. Have you noticed a shift in motives since the pandemic began? Has there been a shift towards some and away from others?
We haven't noticed a significant change in motives per se, but a change in how well met they are. Interestingly, some people felt they had more work-life balance. Given they were working from home, some people actually felt they had less because some of those people said, hey, I need separation and I'm at home with 3 kids and working and I'm never on or off my job. It's constant chaos. People with the community motive, a lot of them have said, oh my God, I'm missing community so much. I'm not in person anymore with people, right? So it doesn't necessarily affect which motives are important, but the degree they're met and why they're either better met or not as well met, right? Like a lot of people had more flexibility with the pandemic. So if that makes sense, it was kind of more of that why behind it.
Yeah. And that actually does, because we've heard that. It almost felt it was too simple to say, well, the introverts are doing really well, the extroverts aren't. But this is taking it down that next level of why is that? It goes back to your integration separation comment from the beginning of this conversation on people really need at their deepest levels. And then how is that being met?
Yeah. And some people realized through the pandemic of, wow, I realized what it was like to actually not have to be in an office with maybe coworkers I don't really like, right? I had an unmet personal connection motive and now I want to leave my job. Or I did have a taste of what work-life balance is, and now I want to leave my job. So there also is, we're living in that great resignation, right? Where a lot of people have realized from the pandemic that they have these motives that weren't being met, that they deserve to have met, and that were being better met because of the pandemic. And now coming out of it, they don't want to go back to the way things were. And so they're leaving their job. So that's really been, I think, the shift that we've seen the most.
Do you see any generational themes, going from the boomers to the Xers to the millennials and now Zs?
It's interesting. I mean, people's individual stories certainly can tell that tale. I mean, I think similar to what you said, oh my God, it would have been so interesting to take this, years ago and see kind of how that changed with my life. But really overall, people are just as likely to have different motives at any age. Just last week, I did a workshop and the VP of sales there, who's been around for a long time, is the fun motive. And he's like, God, I get so mad that it's dismissed at work. It's like number one for me. He's like, it's a big thing for me. So, just the way a millennial can have fun, right? So it is interesting that there really isn't a skew, that all motives are equal. And it's just more of where you are at in your personal work-life journey.
Interesting. Great. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience on Motives Met? Anything that we didn't cover that you think would be useful for them to know?
I feel like we've covered a lot of the big points, but I think something worth reiterating is that Motives Met kind of helps you see blind spots that you might not have known were there. For me, I have the security motive. And that felt a little odd for me. It felt a little out of character because I am an entrepreneur, risk taker, adventurous soul. And it was kind of like, oh, that seems odd. But then as I reflected on it, it made a lot of sense. But for me, that motive is about really wanting to be free from too much worry and doubt and needing to be able to take the calculated risk I want to take with enough comfort. But it's kind of something I'd put through or at the wayside. And if I hadn't taken the assessment, I built the algorithm, but I didn't know what my motives would be until I took it. I knew autonomy and flexibility because those are tied to my values. I am all about self-determination, freedom. That's just kind of part of who I am. I always envision those two will be high up there. But the other three, I didn't guess. And security, again, was a bit of a shock. But it was so important for me to sit there and do my mindset work and go, it isn't necessarily that we want all of our motives to be a 10 out of a 10 on being met. Because for me to have the future success I want and to achieve the things I want to achieve, I can't be too comfy. So I don't want to necessarily feel, 100% secure all the time. But what is that threshold for me, right? What is that foundation of security that I need to create even within myself? And how do I want to start to measure that to make sure it doesn't go too low so that I do feel then the freedom to take the risks I want to take without having that worry in the back of my mind, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's really important for us to see the things we can't currently see. And I think that's really one of the strengths of the tool. And even from a manager standpoint, someone who owns about 100-person company, but said, wow, there's so much I want to do with this from an individual manager standpoint at the company to have managers be able to talk with people about these conversationally on a regular basis because they don't know what they don't know. And when we did a workshop with them, it was shocking how surprised people were by everybody's different motives and why they were so important. So again, I think that blind spot piece is really important just to drive that home.
Yeah. And anytime you have that dialogue, it just strengthens the corporate workplace. So I appreciate the work that you've done and highly encourage those. We'll put links in the show notes on how people can find you. And I'll ask for that in a little bit, but we're going to go into what we call a dose of inspiration. Our listeners love to get to know our guests a little bit more. And so you mentioned that you are a fan of meditation. What else do you do to keep yourself well?
Well, I love boxing, so I call that my sweat therapy. It's almost a different form of meditation for me. So that's a weekly thing. If I don't get that dose of wellness, I can feel it. So that's a big one. One that I've heard is unique is my thought work note cards. So I'm a cognitive coach and, mind management is very much not only about playing defense with our thoughts and managing them from a mindfulness standpoint, but also playing offense with our thoughts and really starting to, think on purpose with purpose. So, when you're wanting to create a different mindset about something and you want to get things deeper in your brain and change your neural pathways, well, like, how do you do it? You do it with practice, like anything else, right? If you were learning something new or practicing for a speech, what would you do? You'd repeat it. So I have note cards with the different thoughts that I'm working on. And every day I go through those note cards and some stay for a long time. And some kind of go quicker or very based on right now. This is something I really want to keep in mind this week, something I'm doing. But it's probably been the biggest in the past few years, recent wellness practice that's been a game changer for me.
I love that. I have an index card that has multiple statements on there, but you do them like flashcards, and then
Yeah.
you can take them out and put them in, and whatever it is that's keep them fresh that way.
Yep.
Is it part of your morning routine? Is it an evening routine?
Yep. It's in the morning with my cup of coffee.
Nice.
And then, like you said, it's nice. I can kind of pull out a few and actually have them propped on my computer. Let it be easy. Let's remember this one today.
Yeah.
Let's keep that up there.
Right.
So it's,
Right.
So it's nice.
I love it. That's great. What have you read or listened to lately that you enjoyed?
I love going back and rereading certain things I love, or going back at least to the notes I've highlighted. So one of the recent ones is Dancing with Life by Philip Moffitt.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great book, and I'd read it many years ago, and every month I try to go back to one of the books I really liked and just keep it fresh in my mind. And it's Buddhism, but for very modern, real world thinking. So a lot of good mindfulness practices, how we deal with uncertainty and control, but again, in a very digestible way. So it's just a go-to for me.
And very timely.
Very timely.
Too, right. Yeah. What new thing or experience are you looking forward to trying?
I'm going to Brazil for the first time in about 2 months. My boyfriend's from there and all of his family lives there. So I've been taking Portuguese lessons, try to be able to communicate a little bit when I'm there, but I'm just so excited to try all the food and experience everything in person. So I've been looking forward to that for a while. Kept getting pushed back throughout the pandemic. So that's probably the thing I'm most excited for.
Something to look forward to. That's great. Wonderful. Envision the perfect road trip. Where do you go? What do you do?
I live in California. I've lived in California a long time, but I still think I would choose the California coast because I just love it. So fun. I'd camp part of the way. I'd drink some great wine in Napa. I'd sightsee in Big Sur and do some hiking. And I've done parts of the coast, but I've never really done a from bottom all the way to the top. So that would be a really fun bucket list thing to do one day.
Absolutely. Beautiful. And what has you feeling inspired these days? What's lighting you up?
I think it's the change of season right now. Even though I'm in California, the air feels different. And I always view this kind of quote unquote back to school time. To me, it always feels more like the new year than the new year. So it's just been a nice time for me to sit and reflect and think about this new season and feel refreshed. So I think just the fact that it's fall has been making me feel inspired.
Great. And then the last one, what has you optimistic about the future?
Well, I think given I'm in the work well-being space and really well-being in general, I think just that we're paying attention to well-being in a real significant way that I feel like has never been done before. And that is so hopeful to me for our future. I mean, at every different part of our society right now, well-being is just showing up in different ways, and people are giving it the attention it really deserves and seeing the problems that were overlooked before. And so it makes me feel that, what we call the attainable dream of a work life well lived, just even from the workspace, it makes me feel that much more hopeful that it is something that we can continue to get closer and closer to.
Yeah, it's a good time to do what we do.
Yes, it is.
No doubt. What's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you, and how can they take the assessment?
Well, you can visit motivesmet.com and take the assessment and just learn more about Motives Met. My email is kelly.mackin@motivesmet.com. So feel free to reach out with any questions, especially if you're a leader or company. We do workshops with companies and help them set up the assessment and all that good stuff.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's a great conversation, very timely, and I really appreciate you joining me, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.